What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Met Central podcast. And today I will be doing this by myself as I don't have my usual co-host Matt with me. Our schedules didn't really work out well this week, so he will be back next week and we will be talking more about this team, of course, because we want to start doing these a little bit more often. And I know I keep saying that every episode, but I would really like to, of course, make this more of a weekly thing and make this more of a thing that, you know, is scheduled for a certain time, certain day, ideally. I don't know if we can get to that point, but either way, I'd like to make it at least weekly. And today we are going to talk about a lot of different things because the Mets, I don't know if you know this, they signed Juan Soto, like the title says, but the work is not done. There's still so much that this team needs to address, and I've had a lot of thoughts building up in my head about this team because there's so many interesting pieces out there for the Mets to go out and acquire, and I know that fans are getting annoyed, fans are getting impatient for David Stearns and company to acquire pitching and acquire all these other names, but at the end of the day, I'm sitting here and trying to just trust the process and wait. Until I have a cause for concern, I'm not going to panic entirely. Am I a little worried about the fact that they have not acquired a starting pitcher and honestly not really been in the mix outside recently for one starting pitcher who's actually in the thumbnail? Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little worried about that. However, I do trust the fact that this organization is going to find a way to get it done. And there are so many other ways they still have to go about this offseason. There's still pieces for the lineup they need to fill out. And there's a lot of correlation between what they do this offseason and next offseason and just future offseasons in general. Because my thing is this, I'm seeing everywhere online all this talk of, oh, they need to go out and pursue Bregman and they need to pursue Corbin Burns and all these other names. But the thing that I always look back on, I forgot when it was said and who it was said by. It might have been Steve Cohen, actually. But there was the whole thing about how you don't want to spend, this is just paraphrasing it, you don't want to spend all of your financial muscles in one off season. And I get that everybody wants to see them, you know, bring back Pete Alonso, add Alex Bregman, and add Corbin Burns, and then go out and try to win this upcoming season. But you have to think about big picture and long term. And I think that's why you're not seeing them rushing to go out and bring back Pete Alonso, considering a Vlad Guerrero Jr. is hitting the market next offseason. You're not seeing them go out and acquire a Corbin Burns because there are guys on the pitching market available that they could acquire through the trade market that will be either cost controllable or they will have, or cost effective rather, or they will be controllable. And you could have them for multiple years, like a Garrett Crochet, who I really wanted, ended up going to the Boston Red Sox, unfortunately. So that takes one name off of the board, which really upsets me. But considering what the White Sox wanted, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm too upset about it, because to be honest with you, the report that they would have had to pair Sproat and Jet Williams, and I'm not even someone that's against moving Jet Williams. I think Sproat, though, is one of those guys I'd really love to hold on to. I personally would have been okay if they went the route of moving those two to land Garrett Crochet. And my reasoning behind it is because I am always proven talent over the unknown. And as much as I think Sproat's going to be unbelievable, by the way, Garrett Crochet is 25 years old and he has control. I would have been more than okay with keeping him, but there's also the side of it where if the Mets front office sees the potential in Sproat to be the level Crochet is, then you don't move that guy and you keep him around because you're going to have more cost controllable years versus, you know, going out and getting Crochet where you have the 2 or 3 years of control and then you have to extend him. And then all of a sudden you watch Sproat in Chicago just killing it. And you're like, man, I wish that we had the controllable asset versus, you know, going out and getting Crochet. But obviously if they got Crochet and won the World Series next year, then none of us would care. But I ain't even finish the intro. Leave a like though on your way in, by the way. Everyone subscribe if you guys are new to the channel, especially if you're Met fans. What's going on? Explosive D, what's going on? 2 months until spring training. I trust Stearns. He knows exactly what we need. Exactly. I mean, there's no reason, in my opinion, to panic and go wild over the fact that there's not been anyone else acquired, which I'm trying to think of where to start. I mean, I guess I could build on the starting pitching front because it's kind of going backwards from what I was going to do. I was going to start with Soto and then talk about the pitching, but I think the pitching is just so much of the conversation lately in Mets world because we're kind of at the end of the honeymoon here of Soto being a Met, and not necessarily just, you know, in terms of him playing on the field and everything. I just mean celebrating the signing and everything. Like, he did the introductory press conference. I was at Citi Field the day that happened. Actually saw him walking in, which was cool. Purchased a couple jerseys. But we're over the honeymoon, and it's to the point where, okay, now it's business needs to get done, and it starts with the starting pitching. And I put out a tweet the other day. If you're not following me on Twitter, @CorePython, I put out a tweet the other day. There are 3 guys that are available, in my opinion, that I think the Mets should be absolutely pursuing on the starting pitching market. And I would go as far as say it is a failure if they do not land one of these 3 names unless they have a pivot option in there. And that being I almost said Garrett Crochet, Dylan Cease, Framber Valdez, and Luis Castillo. Though one of those 3 guys as your frontline starting pitcher, in my opinion, would take this team to another level, and I think they need it. I have been so strong on the stance that they need a guy that eats innings, and right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in this rotation. You look at Kodai Senga, not healthy last year, and he's a guy that thrives on 6 days of rest, so a little bit tough to gauge how many innings you're going to get out of him. And either way, they're probably going with a 6-man rotation one way or another. So it really does not matter entirely in that regard. But that's neither here nor there. You have questions about him. Clay Holmes is converting into a starting pitcher. I can't pencil him in for 150 innings. Nonetheless, you know, getting 120, which is where I think he'll be around, like 120 if he ends up sticking as a starting pitcher. Maybe he does reach the 150 mark, but there's a lot of uncertainty there. Then you look at a guy like Frankie Montas, who probably is your safest bet. Like, I would go as far to say that he is the safest option in terms of you are going to get 5 to 6 innings of ball from him night in and night out, and that will be enough, and he will give you probably the most innings out of any starting pitcher currently as the roster is constructed. David Peterson didn't pitch the full season last year. There's questions about him, and then there's always just, again, health issues. Paul Blackburn could eat some innings if he ends up being in the rotation, but again, not a guy that I'm really counting on, especially because against the good teams last year, we saw him really, really struggle. And I'm forgetting someone else, I feel like. Montas, I mean, McGill's in the mix, but you really don't know what you're getting from Tyler McGill. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that Tyler McGill is going to give you enough innings either. I mean, that's clear as day. But the point being, you have a lot of uncertainty with this rotation. And right now, unless Brandon Sproat is going to take the next step, you have to get a frontline arm that could eat innings. And even then with Sproat, we know how this goes when prospects are called up. We saw it with Christian Scott this past year where innings limit, although the way they managed Scott's innings was still so bizarre to me because there were some days where they were willing to let him go, you know, a little bit further than others, where some it's like we don't want him going through the third part of the order 3 times, but we also do. So it was weird how they managed him, and I don't love the way they did, but either way, the Mets have to get, and I mentioned Clay Holmes. I appreciate that, though, D. The point is, though, they need to get a sure bet innings guy. And in terms of the guys that you look at on the trade market, if I was to give you my favorite out of those 3 names I mentioned, that being, again, Valdez, Castillo, Cease, my favorite option is Castillo. And my reason why is because you have 3 seasons of him under contract, and then there's a vesting option too if he's really pitching well. I don't know what the option is there, but either way, there's a vesting option. I love the idea of bringing in Luis Castillo to have him for the next 3 years being a frontline arm and a sure bet, and he's making 24 million, so it's not like he's making as much money as a guy like Corbin Burns would make if you brought him back. He might be making less annually than it would be to bring back Sean Manaea at this rate. And no offense to Sean Manaea, love what he did for the Mets last year, love Sean Manaea in general. Luis Castillo is a far superior pitcher than Sean Manaea is until proven otherwise in terms of the sustainability with the new arm slot and everything, and we have to see how that goes. And I do believe he's also a year or two younger, so you're getting 3 years of a cheaper contract, a better arm, and an arm that throws a good amount of innings in Luis Castillo. The problem is, how much is it going to cost to land Castillo? I'm not entirely sure, but all I know is that you have to be willing to part with maybe top prospects. And I know that you might look at some of the numbers and be a little bit skeptical of a guy like Luis Castillo, which I'm trying to pull up some of his numbers, like his Savant page and Baseball Reference, just to get an idea of what his numbers were last year, because he had 3.64 ERA, which again, I know doesn't scream frontline stuff to some, but he still has that sort of potential. The FIP is what you might be scared of, a 3.91, but I'm also not that worried considering the fact that the defense behind him will be good here. And he is a guy that still throws like very high 90s. There was a velocity dip this past season, which maybe could be alarming. He does allow a lot of hard contact, but again, not too worried about that in a pitcher-friendly ballpark like Citi Field, which I know he's already in one with Seattle, but either way, I'm not too worried about that stuff. And the only other thing that you can maybe worry about is the swing and miss stuff was a little bit down, but he's a guy that limits walks for the most part, because that's something that was a big issue for this pitching staff last year. And he is a guy that has potential to be a frontline starter one way or another. And I would be more than okay with giving up a lot of quality pieces for him. Do I think they should go out and give Sproat up for Castillo? No, hell no. And if the report is true that they turned down an offer or they demanded a guy like Casas, then the Mets aren't going to acquire him, because if they want and demand a guy like Tristan Casas from the Boston Red Sox, the Mets aren't going to be able to land him because they don't really have a piece that's equivalent to that. And quite frankly, I wouldn't want them, even if they did have a piece equivalent, to give up a piece to that caliber for a guy like Castillo. And maybe your closest comparable is Mark Vientos, honestly, and I'm not giving up Mark Vientos to get Castillo. As much as I like Castillo and I would give up assets for him, that's a little bit too far. But then you go to the other two options, which could be a little bit more obtainable, considering the fact that they are strictly rental options for 1 year, and they most likely are going to test the market. The problem is, do you want to put yourself in a spot where you're giving up prime assets to get guys that only are going to be here for 1 year? And I look at the two options, and I would say I'd prefer Dylan Cease because of age and because of the fact that you could give him a little bit of a longer contract. And I do think Dylan Cease would also just be freaking really good to add. But again, the problem that I have is this. So say they were to give up a guy like Sproat in a Dylan Cease trade, and that's what got it done. Why would you do that instead and go out and get Dylan Cease? To me, I'd rather them just sign Corbin Burns this offseason at that point. To me, it's all about, especially with him and Valdez, what you're giving up. Because Castillo, at least there's term on that contract to where you're giving up guys, but Castillo's here for a few years. But Dylan Cease and Framber Valdez, unless you're extending those guys, it's not worth giving up that many prospects for. And again, why not just go get Corbin Burns, who is better than both of these guys, if you are going to give up the moon and the stars for Dylan Cease, which obviously that remains to be seen. But you look at what Dylan Cease has in terms of the stuff, throws throws one of the better fastballs in the league, like high 90s, in terms of velocity, that is. But his breaking ball stuff, unbelievable. I mean, that slider that he's able to utilize, curveball, sweeper, he's got he's got a 6-pitch mix, doesn't utilize the changeup and cutter as much, but he is capable of throwing that, and he still thrives. I mean, if they could unlock his curveball or his sweeper to be a little bit more effective, who knows how good a guy like Dylan Cease could be if you all of a sudden get him in the lab here and get him working on that sort of stuff. And he's a guy that does have frontline stuff yet again. I mean, you look at the numbers, not as reliant on the defense as much as a guy like Castillo is, with a 3.10 FIP, a 3.47 ERA. That was in 189 innings. So you're getting innings. He's a guy that throws north of 170 innings annually. And the one time he didn't is when it was 2021, where he threw 165. So, oh well, he's going to be out there every 5 days, and you don't have to worry. I would love Dylan Cease, and I think that he would be such a great ad. But again, I worry about giving up too much for a guy that might not be here for the long haul. If they extend him, I'm for it. But then again, wouldn't you rather just go out and get a guy like Corbin Burnes? Unless they really think Corbin Burnes is going to decline quickly, and they think that Cease is a safer bet to give a long-term deal, that's a different conversation. But even then, maybe you just wait for Cease to hit the open market next year then. And then you go out and pay a guy like him. And then if you look at Valdez, he's another guy that has a lot of interesting tools. He does have a 5-pitch mix: sinker, curve, changeup, slider, four-seam. So not a guy that utilizes his fastball as much. Allows a good amount of hard contact. Would play better here than he does in Houston in terms of the ballpark. That is really, really good breaking stuff. Doesn't walk too much. Like, he's dead smack in the middle in terms of his walk rate, so it's not too bad. But he's striking batters out at a very solid rate for the most part. And he is a guy that does generate a good amount of swing and miss and a good amount of ground balls, especially ground balls. So I would be for bringing in literally any of these guys. And to me, I don't care if they brought any of them in, as long as they're not giving up Sproat in any of these deals. Like, for me, he's the one untouchable. I would prefer not to move Clifford. If it's what it takes to get a frontline guy, you move him. But I do worry about getting one of these guys and it being just simply a 1-year sort of deal. If these, like, that's my thing. That's my problem, where I'm having a tough time envisioning getting one of these guys and giving an extension when Corbin Burnes is to this level, if not better, and he could be had on the open market for as much as these guys might extend for to begin with. So that's where I'm having a hard time thinking, are they actually going to go out and acquire one of these guys? I think they need to. I think it's really a necessity if they want to compete for next year. But what are your other options? I mean, the other options are you bring back Sean Manaea, which I don't love the idea, because, again, if you're going to give up Sean, or if you're going to give 3 to 4 years to Sean Manaea, why don't you just go get Corbin Burnes then? Because Manaea is going to be here for 3 to 4 years, right? You could get prime Corbin Burnes years for those 3 to 4 years. You'll see the fall off after that, but at least I'm getting dominant production from Corbin Burnes. And I've been against getting Corbin Burnes all offseason, but I'm not as much against it as I was not too long ago, because when I look at the other options, it's just, again, what is there? Because when I talk, what I open the show with, when you talk about, the here, now, and the long term, looking at the big picture, what makes sense? And I know that there's issues that you got to worry about with the decline of Corbin Burnes, but Burnes is 30 years old. Manaea is, was he 32? 32, but you give Manaea a 4-year deal, and Corbin Burnes for the first 2 years versus hitting Sean Manaea's age at that point. I don't know how much he wants per year, and that's really what it comes down to, but I don't think they're even going to get Corbin Burnes. I think it's a moot point, but I just worry where this pitching staff is going next year, because what are truly the alternatives if you're not going to get Burnes, if you're not going to land any of these guys on the market, the trade market that is? What are you going to do? I mean, I love Sasaki. If they could find a way, I'll say this. If they could get Sasaki and then bring in like a Nick Pivetta, you could sell me on that idea because I know you're getting a little bit more innings out of that pitching staff, and there's at least 2 more sure bets coming in, a little bit less with Sasaki, who's an unknown and pitched on 6 days of rest over in Japan. But either way, there at least is a little bit of a safety net here, and I do love what Sasaki brings to the table in terms of his stuff alone, and I think that him coming here would work out, especially, again, pitcher-friendly ballpark, all that other stuff, and the fact that they're clearly going with a 6-man rotation. This could be a place that he would be comfortable pitching in. It's just, again, do you bank on that, or do you go for a more safe bet in one of these guys? I'm not sure, but all I know is that there's a lot of pitching options, and for anyone that is out there saying, oh, well, we're screwed, David Stearns, what is he doing? What is he cooking? He needs to do something. To me, I'm not worried until there's a reason to be worried. There are still so many pitchers on the market. I mean, I just named you like 5 or 6 of them, and all of them, in my opinion, would be ideal. Like, I would be, again, not my money with Corbin Burnes. If that's the route they go down, it's the route they go down. And again, there might be regression after 2 to 3 years, and it might hurt, but you're going to get some good years out of him. If it's Sean Manaea, I have concerns, but there's concerns about everyone. That's really the point that I'm going to hammer home. There are concerns about every pitcher, to be honest with you. It is pitching at the end of the day, and that's where I would maybe prefer the trade market, is that at least if a guy like Cease or Valdez don't thrive in the 1 year here, you could cut ties with them. You don't have to bring them back. But again, do you want to give up prospects for a guy that might be here for 1 year? But there is a lot of options. There's still Walker Buehler out there, which I'm starting to be a little bit less in favor of. I would prefer Nick Pivetta personally over Walker Buehler, as insane as that might sound. I just trust Pivetta in terms of the consistency, and you know what you're getting, where Walker Buehler, his upside's better than Nick Pivetta, but you don't know if you're going to hit that upside. And I know he was great in the playoffs, but I can't sit here and say you're going to get that upside from him. And there's still a couple of other options. I mean, they could go the route of bringing in a Jack Flaherty. I'm not in favor of it at all, but he's out there. They have to land somebody, though, because this rotation isn't good enough, and you give them time because obviously they're going to land a starting pitcher, but it's a weird spot. It is a really weird spot with this team right now, but they still have so much money to spend. I mean, they're not even close to where their payroll was last year, and that says a lot because they had like 180 million coming off the books between dead money and then in terms of players that were on expiring deals. And I don't think they're going to end up moving, unfortunately, a guy like Starling Marte or Jeff McNeil. I would love it. Don't think it's going to happen. But if you move those 2 guys, the money opens up. So there are avenues to go down here to where it could make sense to to go out and pay a starting pitcher. But that's where we shift to the lineup, which still needs attention, because this lineup still has a lot of holes in it. Pete Alonso obviously being the name that everybody is clamoring to want back, and I'm seeing Alex Bregman stuff lately, which I'm not in favor of the Alex Bregman thing. And I get the idea that, he could be, maybe he could be a good piece, and, he's a guy that has finished in the top of MVP voting before. My problem is there are a lot of signs that there's going to be regression. There's a lot of signs that he's not going to play well in a ballpark that's bigger like Citi Field. You look at a lot of his home run chart and a lot of his stuff, a lot of it is to the Crawford boxes, and I just worry about that. And he's a guy that was not putting up the MVP numbers outside of the years that there was juice baseballs and the year that Pete Alonso had 53 home runs. Outside of that, he's been consistently like a 20, 30 home run bat, which again, how much could you attest to that to Houston? And he's been like an 800 OPS guy, which is a good player, but I don't think it makes sense at all to go out and give a $20 million a year contract to Alex Bregman to come in and play third base and then move Mark Vientos to first base. I don't think that makes sense. And I get that you upgrade your defense in that regard because Alex Bregman could play a better third base than Mark Vientos. That's for damn sure. But I don't think it makes any sense to go out and overpay for Bregman when it continues to go back to how I opened it. I go back to long-term vision. The guy that I want desperately is Vlad Guerrero Jr. And when I look at next offseason, I think there's a realistic chance the Mets could get him. And I could tell you right now, if you want to go toe-to-toe with the Dodgers, you need to match that big three with some firepower of your own. And I'm not sitting here saying the Mets, big three, if they added Vlad and they had Lindor and Soto, I'm not sitting here and saying that big three is better than Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman, but it sure as hell could go toe-to-toe with it. And if Lindor puts up the numbers he did from May on, there is a conversation that could be had that trio is just as good, if not better, than the Dodgers trio. And as good as Ohtani is because he could pitch, and as good as Mookie Betts is, Vlad Guerrero Jr. led pretty much every category at first base. And to me, I would rather bring back Pete Alonso at $150 million, whatever it may be, for 6 years, and then get Vlad next offseason, put Vlad at first, and have Pete be the DH. And I know it might be a little bit scary, the thought of bringing in Alonso and having that much money and that much long-term commitment tied to a DH. But I also look at the Dodgers, who just won with Ohtani strictly being their DH, and I sit here and say, well, is it the worst thing? And he's going to strictly be their DH for as long as he's there, outside of the days he's on the bump. And then even when he comes out of the game, he's going to be the DH. So I sit here and say, and especially with Marte's money coming off the books next year, wouldn't you rather just bring back Pete Alonso, virtually run it back with the same team as last year, plus Juan Soto, which makes this team go to another level, might I add. But obviously there's a little more uncertainty with the pitching, I know that. But wouldn't you rather that from the lineup standpoint, and then let some of the young guys start to infuse their way into the lineup, whether it's Ronnie Mauricio coming into play second base, coming into play third base, and then, you shift things around there. Whether it's giving Brett Beatty a crack at second base, I don't know. I'm not high on Brett Beatty at all right now, but there is that option. I would rather them go this avenue of that, just go down that road, than Bregman and Alonso. Because as good as it would be for having those two for 1 year, I would rather look at the long-term picture. And even if it's not Bregman or Guerrero next offseason, pivot to Naylor. I think Naylor would be just as fine. Obviously, he's not Vlad level, but I would be fine with Naylor over giving Bregman that type of money on a long-term deal. Unless his market cools down and he's looking at the Matt Chapman market towards the end of his free agency, then yeah, absolutely on board with it. But right now, I can't sit here and say they should go out and get Bregman unless there's a world where, again, this is the only way that you could sell me on the idea of Bregman. They still go out and get quality arms. They're still in the mix for Vlad next offseason. They bring back Pete Alonso, and Bregman's willing to play second base. And then you just have an unbelievable super team where you have, Vlad Guerrero Jr. This is 2026 I'm talking. You have Vlad playing first. You got Pete DHing, Bregman as your second baseman, Lindor as your shortstop, Vientos at third. Unless you are somehow able to swing that, and I don't think it's possible with the lack of financial flexibility you'd have down the road, but unless you could swing that, I'm not that interested. Because I just saw Jose Iglesias give you enough production at second base. And again, it's not that sustainable. I'm well aware. But I just watched it happen. I look at this farm system and I see a lot of guys that could come in and play second base, and you could save some money there. And I get that everyone's like, well, Steve Cohen has the pockets, utilize it. You don't want to spend like drunken sailors, and you don't want to spend on assets that don't make sense. And in my opinion, Bregman is a guy that does not make sense, in my opinion, for this team. And could I be wrong? Sure. And I think they're still going to, at the very least, pursue Bregman. But I think it's very fair to question what he would bring to the table here and question if it would make sense. Because if he signs a 6 to 8 year deal, you're having him until he's in his late 30s. And to that, no thank you. There are already signs of regression. I don't think it's smart to get tied long term with Alex Bregman when there's a lot of questions to begin with, and he's just going to regress more. And even if you could swing the second base thing for him, again, big picture. You got to look big picture at future free agent markets. And I don't know what the future free agent markets look like entirely, but I can tell you right now, I'm sure there are better options still than Alex Bregman that you could get to come in to play, second base or one of the corner infield positions, whatever it may be. All this to say, though, that with the Pete Alonso thing, because that's really the most realistic conversation here, is bringing back Pete Alonso potentially. I just have mixed feelings about it because I get worried. He's similar in the boat of Bregman, not entirely because I think Alonso is better than Bregman, but I worry about regression. I really do, because there's been regression ever since his rookie season, and I know that it was going to be unrealistic to ask him to sustain what he did his rookie season, but I worry about there being more and more regression throughout that contract. And do you rope that money into that when Vlad Guerrero Jr. is going to be available at age 25, 26, whatever it is, going into that season, and he is a better first baseman far and away? I mean, he led the league. He led the first base, every first baseman in the league. He led in WRC plus, led in WAR for first baseman, hits for high average, chips in 30 to 40 home runs, high slugging percentage, gets on base. Don't you like the sound of a trio of Vlad Guerrero Jr., Juan Soto, and Francisco Lindor? That would be fucking sick, man. And again, you have to consider the option, and this is where, again, it comes down to how much Cohen is willing to invest. But I really think there's a world where you could bring back Pete, and again, you have him DH after the 1 year. And then when Marte's off the books, McNeil, you can maybe shed his salary next year. If not, he's only got 1 more year left until you could get out of that contract. You could potentially swing having all of them. And then imagine that lineup. I mean, you have Vientos still in the mix. Nimmo obviously there. Is that entirely possible? I don't know. It really, again, comes down to how much they're willing to spend on the lineup, because, again, you're going to have to spend money on pitching just as much as the lineup at one point, because I talk about it all the time. As much as I love the project pitchers and I love the idea of trying to unlock certain guys and being a destination where guys want to come to fix their stuff, they come here, you get good value out of them, and then you let them walk. It's only going to work so much. There are going to be failures in doing these project experiments. You're going to have sure bets at one point. So it really comes down to how much they're willing to tie money into the lineup there. And to me, I would love that. But again, I worry about regression with Alonso still. I think Stern stays away from players with qualifying offers, also losing international free agent money, pass on Bregman. I agree with that. And I think some of that could just be smoke to drive up the asking price, or just the price in general with a guy like Bregman, that he's being linked to the Mets. But I agree with you entirely. I think that they should stay away from that. I would rather give up a pick and everything else next year for Vlad. But by far and away. Not even close. I would rather give out the money to go get Vlad Guerrero Jr. and the qualifying pick, money, everything. Thank you. I appreciate that, Kaylee. But it's really interesting to see how they're going to go about this roster. It really is, because, again, we're sort of ending the honeymoon phase with a guy in Juan Soto, that is. The honeymoon's ending, and again, I'm still very excited to watch him play. And the honeymoon's not over in that regard. The honeymoon's over in the sense that they got to go out and add more now. The honeymoon's over in terms of, all right, happy about this. Go out and make more moves now, because they still have to address the bullpen, which I'm not worried too much about that. Stearns will find guys. Reliever market gets weird. And later on, they could wait to find guys. I'm not worried at all about the bullpen. To me, that's the least of the concerns right now, because even right now, I think you're in a somewhat comfortable position. Nunez, if he could come back healthy, adds a whole different dynamic, as long as, you know, he doesn't have his arm fall apart, because I do worry about injuries with him potentially next year as well, as much as I love Nunez. Tyler McGill needs to be in the bullpen next year. That would add a weapon. Jose Budo, you wonder what they're going to do with him. He's a guy that I could see coming back into the rotation if Holmes doesn't work out. I could tell you that. Reed Garrett, you can't run his arm into the ground. Either way, they have already some pieces they will find with the bullpen. I'm not worried. To me, I'm more worried that they find a corner infielder. They find a starting pitcher. To me, those are the two biggest holes on the team right now. And I think once you get a starting pitcher, or two, if they get two starting pitchers, that'd be better, because then Blackburn could go to the bullpen. You land two starting pitchers, and you land a corner infield bat, then I think that things are looking good, because you could fill out the bullpen easily late in the offseason. Again, I'm not worried about that. And they still have so much money to spend to where the bullpen's the least of the concerns. You find guys on one-year deals. Maybe you give them $10 million, whoever it may be. I'm not sure who that might be, whether, you know, bringing back David Robertson, but he's also up there in age. But you like the reverse splits there, whether it's bringing in Kendall Graveman, who's coming back from injuries, which does intrigue me, the idea of bringing him in, to be completely honest with you. Tommy Cangley's a free agent who I like. There are guys. I'm not as worried about the bullpen. I'm more worried about the lineup being addressed. And to me, if they're not going to bring back Pete, and they're not going to bring in Bregman, I want them, and this is going to be a very hot take, I would be more than okay with them doing a bridge for next year to get Vlad. And I know I'm being annoying about it, but it's the guy that I think makes the most sense for the long term. And if you want to compete with the Dodgers, I would be okay with them bringing in a guy like Carlos Santana or Paul Goldschmidt on a one-year deal to come in and play first base. And I know that you look at the numbers, you look at their age, and you're like, you want to vomit. But Carlos Santana is a guy that is the definition of consistent. Like, if you want consistency, textbook definition of consistency is Carlos Santana. He will give you around a 240 average every year, give you a league average OPS, give you like a 420 slugging percentage, 300 to 320 on base, which that you'd like to see go up, and give you 20 to 30 bombs a year. That's what you get in Carlos Santana. And Paul Goldschmidt, I know people aren't going to love the idea. Truth be told, I'd rather Paul Goldschmidt on a one-year deal than bring in Nolan Arenado, who's also a name that's out there. Because Nolan Arenado, that's a lot of money that you'd be committed to. Paul Goldschmidt, I know he had a down year. A lot of that is because of the walks. But I think if you bring him into a lineup where he is not going to be one of the main guys, I think he could thrive in that environment. I think that you could start to see him take a little bit better ABs, because 2023 wasn't that bad of a year for him if you look at the slash line. 25 home runs, 268 average, 363 on base, 447 slugging, and 810 OPS. I think if you bring him in, let him see a little bit more pitches that he could hit, I think that he's a guy that could thrive in this environment. Not too far removed from winning an MVP either. I mean, 2022, one MVP, which I don't think you're going to get that from him. But the problem really is he plays a very bad first base. Like, he is really not good there. But for 1 year, Paul Goldschmidt, if you don't go the direction of bringing Pete back, I don't hate the idea. I really don't hate the idea but then you have to get Vlad next offseason. Like, it is mandatory that you go all out like you did with Soto this year to get Vlad Guerrero Jr. because you can't bring Paul Goldschmidt in and, then next year not get Vlad, and you're stuck in this position of, okay, I guess we'll settle for Naylor, or we'll settle for, I forgot the name of the guy coming over from Japan next year. I apologize with that, but you got to go out and get a long-term, more sure bet if you're bringing one of those guys in. And again, I know it's not the attractive names that people want to hear, but I really don't hate the idea if they went the route of Goldschmidt. Truth be told, I wouldn't mind Paul Goldschmidt coming in the DH a bit next year. And I know it might be unpopular, and maybe I'm hanging a little bit too much on to what he has been in previous years, and people might have JD Martinez hangover with the idea of bringing him in, but he still hits the ball hard, still gives you 20 home runs, 30 home runs. I don't hate it. I really don't hate it. Whether it's DH, bridging him as a first baseman, I think he could get value there. And in terms of the home runs, if you want to say, well, maybe a lot of it is St. Louis, he would have had 24 of his home runs this past year in Citi Field. He would have hit 24 home runs in Citi Field this past year. So he's a guy that could still give you power. And I could tell you right now, I would prefer Paul Goldschmidt as a DH over Starling Marte, and that's not even a question. You could flip Starling Marte, get some relievers, and you bring Goldschmidt, Santana, one of those two in the DH, and then maybe bring back Pete still, and then still go after Vlad next offseason, then you're talking. But there are so many avenues they could go down to where I don't know if... it's hard to sit here on December 15th and say, they need to do this, they need to do this, because there's so many avenues to where I just want to see how this roster is going to shake up, and I want to see where they go before I just, start. It's just interesting conversations, but I just want to see how this roster is going to shake up. I really do, so we can start talking about, what's real and who's actually here and everything. Because right now, this lineup, as good as it is at the top, need a lot of work in the middle of that order. But Joe coming in saying bullpen, you need a lockdown bullpen to win the World Series. Relievers are volatile. Stern says it. Everybody says it. You don't know what you're getting from a reliever on a year-to-year basis. I would say there are 5% of relievers in the league that are safe bets. The other 95% is a crapshoot. That's the truth of it. And I get what you're saying, but there's nobody on the free agent market I would give a long-term deal to that's a reliever. I'm sorry there's not. I like Tanner Scott a lot, not committing long-term money and a long-term deal to a reliever. You don't commit long-term deals to a reliever. You don't. Unless it's a really, really sure bet with Diaz, and even then, I don't love the Diaz contract. I don't. You got to find relievers. You got to find diamonds in the rough. And I think the guy that I would really consider right now is Kendall Graveman. I mean, he's a guy that's going to get 1 year, coming back from injuries. I think you could get some value out of Kendall Graveman. And if he could find his stuff that he had from the past, season that he was healthy, that is, that's a guy that could be a back-end type piece, potentially. Kendall Graveman does intrigue me a little bit. And if not him, I mean, you got to find guys on 1 year deals. I'm not, after the way things were shaping out, I don't want them to give long-term money. Like, I would bring Stanek back on a 1 year deal. I would bring back Brooks Raley next year as a, let's see if you could bounce back sort of deal. But they can't tie up long-term commitment. If a guy like David Robertson wants 1 year, which I don't think he's going to get more than that considering his age, go ahead. Especially you have financial flexibility potentially, go ahead. Bring him in potentially. Or Jose Leclerc interests me. But it comes down to how much these guys want. And I think they could find guys on the trade market too to fill out the bullpen and really shape things up. I mean, you could flip Marte for relievers, which we're hearing rumors about. Brett Beatty, you could trade for, some arms potentially. Don't overpay for relievers. And I get what you're saying. You need a lockdown bullpen to win. But you have to find guys that are on the cheap, because you look at the Dodgers, Evan Phillips came through their system. Blake Trinan was not really on a heavy contract at all. Still is not right now, even with the new deal he got. Bruce Gratterall came up through their system. Didn't really pitch much. Anthony Bonda, they found off of waivers from the Mets. Michael Kopech. He's on a cheaper deal. Traded for him. Viesa. Found him. You can't pay for your relievers. You got to find your guys. You convert some of the guys that are in the system to relievers as well. And I know Scott's not going to pitch next year, but I would love the idea, and I wanted him when he was healthy this past year to go in the bullpen. I would love the idea of moving Christian Scott potentially to the bullpen when he first comes back to ease him back in. I think you could get value there. You build your bullpen on the fly. I know it's not the thing that fans want to hear, but that's what you do. You can't overpay for relievers. Dan, what's going on? And I get that fans want to see them go out and acquire the big names on the reliever market, but I would rather see them go the trade market and get guys that are cost effective over anything else. But I am going to wrap it up here, since I am going here myself here on the stream, and I do have things to do today. So I really do appreciate all of you guys tuning in. Next time, Matt will probably be back on the show, so at least we could have a little bit more of a back and forth conversation here and all that other stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to give my thoughts. Juan Soto, bet, still can't believe it, still freaking pumped about it. But yeah, I really do appreciate all you guys watching. Leave a like if you did enjoy, subscribe if you guys are new to the channel. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.